Fame in Hollywood can arrive in a single moment. One breakout role, one hit show, and suddenly the world knows your name. The money flows, the red carpets roll out, and millions of fans cheer your success. But in an industry built on reputation, everything can collapse just as quickly. One careless word, one scandal, one decision made in anger or arrogance. And the same spotlight that made you famous can burn your entire career to the ground. Today, we're uncovering 11 black actors who reached incredible heights, only to watch their careers crumble because of choices that shocked Hollywood. Some lost everything in a single moment. Others slowly destroyed their own opportunities. And trust me, a few of these stories are far more shocking than you might expect. Orlando Brown. Orlando Brown. Let's start with Orlando Brown. As a child, millions watched him light up their screens with laughter on That's So Raven. He was one of Disney Channel's most recognizable faces, playing the quick-witted and hilarious Eddie Thomas alongside Raven-Symoné. Fame came early, and with it the promise of a bright future. But Brown's life would later become a painful reminder of how addiction can slowly unravel even the most promising careers. In the early 2000s, signs of trouble began to surface. Brown was arrested multiple times on charges that included domestic assault, drug possession, and resisting arrest. At first, many believed these were temporary missteps, something a young star might recover from. But the incidents kept piling up, and the situation grew harder to ignore. Soon, his behavior became increasingly unpredictable. Fans began noticing strange social media posts and unsettling interviews that painted a troubling picture. In several appearances, Brown made bizarre claims, including insisting he was the father of celebrity children and making uncomfortable remarks about well-known stars. His appearance changed dramatically, and it became painfully clear that he was battling serious substance abuse. Disturbing videos began circulating online, showing him in vulnerable and chaotic moments. Former co-stars and industry colleagues publicly expressed concern, hoping he would find the help he needed. Brown entered rehab more than once and faced repeated arrests over the years. Each time, he spoke about recovery and promised a comeback, but rebuilding trust in Hollywood proved far more difficult. In an industry where reliability is everything, Brown's reputation suffered lasting damage. Major networks and film studios became unwilling to take the risk on someone whose behavior had become so unpredictable and whose legal history continued to grow. And so, a young actor who once seemed destined for a long and successful career slowly faded from the spotlight. Orlando Brown went from a beloved Disney star with limitless potential to someone the entertainment industry quietly avoided. His talent was never the question. But the choices he made, and the grip of addiction, ultimately made it impossible for him to remain part of mainstream entertainment. Isaiah Washington. Isaiah Washington, a name that once carried the weight of one of television's biggest sensations. At the height of his career, he portrayed Dr. Preston Burke on Grey's Anatomy, one of the most beloved medical dramas in television history. He was a central figure of the show, earning a steady paycheck while millions of fans tuned in every week to watch him. For a while, everything seemed to be unfolding exactly as a rising star would hope. But then, one moment changed everything. In 2006, during a heated argument on set, Washington directed a homophobic slur toward his co-star T.R. Knight. At first, the situation appeared to be handled privately behind closed doors. For a brief time, it seemed the controversy might fade away. But the real damage came months later at the 2007 Golden Globe Awards. During a backstage press conference, Washington publicly denied ever making the remark, and in doing so, repeated the same offensive language again. Cameras were rolling. Within hours, the clip spread everywhere. The backlash was immediate and unavoidable. Producers and network executives found themselves under intense pressure, and the show's leadership ultimately decided they had no choice but to act. Despite issuing a public apology and seeking counseling afterward, Washington was written out of Grey's Anatomy and officially fired in 2007. From that moment on, his career never truly returned to the level it once held. He continued to appear in films and television, including a role in the historical film Centennial, along with a handful of smaller projects. But the reality was clear: he had gone from being a standout star on one of the most watched shows in the world to struggling to secure major roles. Hollywood has a long memory, especially when controversy becomes part of someone's public identity. Washington had talent, presence, and influence. Yet a single moment of anger, followed by the far worse decision to repeat those words on a global stage, permanently altered the trajectory of his career. The very show that launched so many of his castmates into lasting stardom became the place where his own rise came to an abrupt end. While former colleagues moved forward into bigger opportunities and greater success, Washington found himself watching from the sidelines. Terrence Howard seemed destined for unstoppable success. He earned an Academy Award nomination for his breakout performance in Hustle and Flow, delivered powerful roles in acclaimed films like Crash, and introduced audiences to James "Rhodey" Rhodes in the very first Iron Man. With Marvel launching what would become one of the biggest franchises in film history, Howard appeared perfectly positioned for superstardom. But in a twist few expected, that momentum unraveled, driven by money disputes and increasingly puzzling behavior. After Iron Man became a global hit, Marvel invited Howard back for the sequel, but with a much smaller paycheck. Ironically, he had been the highest-paid actor in the original film, even earning more than Robert Downey Jr. When the studio offered him less for the follow-up. Howard refused and publicly criticized both Marvel and several of his co-stars. The studio moved on, replacing him with Don Cheadle, who has played War Machine ever since. Yet losing Iron Man was only the beginning of a much larger fall. Howard was later arrested multiple times in domestic violence cases involving different partners. He has claimed that Robert Downey Jr. is the reason he struggles to land major roles, but many industry insiders say the real issue is his reputation for being difficult on set, combined with his growing list of legal troubles. As if that wasn't enough, Howard also drew attention for promoting unusual theories about mathematics. He says he created a system he calls teriology, insisting that 1 times 1 equals 2, not 1. In interviews, he passionately explains these ideas, statements that have left many Hollywood executives even more reluctant to work with him. Howard did find renewed visibility during his successful run on the series Empire, but even that couldn't completely restore his standing in the industry. What once looked like the rise of a major Hollywood star has instead become a cautionary story: how talent, success, and opportunity can vanish when bridges are burned and reputation begins to crumble. Charlie Murphy had finally stepped out of the long shadow of his legendary brother, Eddie Murphy. For years, he'd been known simply as Eddie's brother, but everything changed when he appeared on Chappelle's show. His unforgettable, true Hollywood stories sketches, especially the wild tales about Rick James and Prince, became instant classics. The stories spread everywhere, turning Charlie into a cultural phenomenon almost overnight. Suddenly, the industry was paying attention. Offers for comedy specials, film roles, and voice acting work began pouring in. For the first time, Charlie Murphy wasn't standing beside fame, he was living in it. But success can be fragile, and the momentum he worked so hard to build slowly began to slip away. Unlike others whose careers collapsed under scandal or crime, Murphy's struggles came from something quieter but just as damaging: reputation. In Hollywood circles, he began to gain a reputation for being extremely difficult to work with. Directors and producers often found themselves clashing with him on set, as Murphy insisted that scenes, jokes, and even production decisions be done his way. Crew members from multiple projects later described tense environments and constant disagreements that made collaborations harder than they needed to be. Another turning point came when Murphy publicly criticized Dave Chappelle after Chappelle famously walked away from Chappelle's show and a massive $50 million contract. While many comedians and industry insiders respected Chappelle's decision to step away and protect his mental health, Murphy openly questioned that choice. His comments didn't sit well with many people in the comedy world, especially those who admired Chappelle for putting his well-being ahead of fame and money. At the same time, Murphy made another costly decision, turning down opportunities that could have kept his career moving forward. Some roles didn't offer enough money, others weren't big enough in his eyes. He was waiting for that one defining role, the kind of breakout moment that would elevate him to the same level of fame as his brother Eddie. But that moment never arrived. As years passed, the phone calls slowed, and the industry's attention quietly shifted elsewhere. By the time Murphy realized the doors were closing, Hollywood had already moved on to the next generation of stars. When he later reflected on his career in interviews, he spoke with honesty and humility, admitting that he wished he had been easier to work with and more appreciative of the opportunities he had been given. Charlie Murphy passed away in 2017 after battling leukemia, leaving behind a legacy that remains both hilarious and bittersweet, a reminder of how quickly success can rise and how easily it can fade. Stacey Dash, once America's sweetheart of the 90s. Her role as Dion in Clueless turned her into a household name, and she even carried that success into a television series inspired by the film. She had the beauty, the talent, and a loyal fan base behind her. Everything seemed perfectly aligned for a long, thriving career in Hollywood. Then everything changed. Dash began making a series of political statements that quickly alienated much of the audience that once supported her. She stepped into the spotlight as a vocal political commentator, something that doesn't automatically end a career. But her remarks often sparked controversy and felt more like provocation than thoughtful conversation. Some of her comments deeply offended many in the Black community. She suggested that Black History Month should be eliminated and questioned the need for institutions like BET and the NAACP Image Awards. Not long after, she joined Fox News as a contributor, a move that widened the distance between her and much of the Hollywood industry that had once embraced her. Her presence on social media grew increasingly combative. Dash frequently lashed out at critics and openly attacked anyone who challenged her views. For studios and networks, the constant controversy became a risk they simply didn't want attached to their projects. In 2018, Dash attempted to enter politics herself, announcing a run for Congress, but she withdrew before the primary election. Years later, she reflected on that period of her life, admitting she had been consumed by anger and that her behavior during those years wasn't healthy. In 2021, she publicly apologized for the divisive rhetoric that had defined that era, acknowledging she had alienated people and burned important bridges. But by then, the damage had already been done. She had gone from a beloved actress with steady opportunities to someone the industry quietly avoids. In the end, it wasn't just her political beliefs that closed doors, it was the way she delivered them and her willingness to insult and demean anyone who disagreed that ultimately made her unemployable in Hollywood. Michael Jai White should have been one of Hollywood's biggest action stars. A legitimate martial artist with black belts in multiple disciplines, he has the physique, the presence, and the intensity that action heroes are made of. In 1997, he also made history as the first Black actor to portray a major comic book superhero in a theatrical release when he played Spawn. So why didn't his career explode the way many expected? Much of the answer lies in the choices he made and the reputation he developed behind the scenes. After Spawn received mixed reviews, White was offered opportunities to appear in larger action films. But he turned down several roles because he believed they didn't properly showcase his martial arts skills or lacked the seriousness he wanted from his work. For White, authenticity and respect for martial arts mattered more than simply taking the next big paycheck. Directors and producers have often described him as extraordinarily talented, but also extremely particular. White frequently insisted on having strong control over fight choreography and would clash with stunt coordinators or directors about how action scenes should be filmed. While his dedication to realism is admirable, that level of control sometimes made studios view him as more difficult than the role required. He also didn't shy away from speaking his mind about other martial arts stars. In interviews, White openly criticized actors like Steven Seagal and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Whether his opinions were fair or not, publicly calling out other figures in the same niche rarely builds goodwill in an industry where reputation and relationships matter. As a result, instead of rising to the level of mainstream action icons, White spent much of his career appearing in direct-to-video films and smaller projects. It's easy to imagine him sharing the spotlight with names like Jet Li or Jason Statham. The talent was always there. But a combination of selective choices and a reputation for being difficult kept him from reaching those same heights. In recent years, White himself has admitted that he might have benefited from being a little more flexible early in his career. Even so, his skills, presence, and passion for martial arts continue to earn him respect among fans who know just how great he could have been. If this story has you thinking, tap the like button and tell me in the comments which actor's journey shocked you the most. Monique once stood at the very peak of Hollywood. After delivering a breathtaking performance in Precious, she won the Academy Award, received thunderous standing ovations, and was widely praised for one of the most unforgettable performances of the year. In theory, that kind of moment should open every door in the industry. She should have had the freedom to choose any role she wanted. Instead, her career took a stunning turn. Today, Monique openly admits that the fallout that followed was partly her own doing. After winning the Oscar, she declined to continue promoting Precious beyond what her contract required. She refused to attend international film festivals or participate in additional press tours unless she was paid. From her perspective, it was a matter of principle: work should be compensated. But in Hollywood, the unwritten rules often matter as much as the contracts. Extra promotion, especially after an Oscar win, is considered part of playing the game. And her refusal didn't sit well with producers and studio executives. Then the situation escalated. Monique publicly accused Oprah Winfrey, Tyler Perry, and director Lee Daniels of blackballing her in the industry. Whether her claims were justified or not, calling out three of the most powerful figures in Hollywood, publicly and repeatedly, sent shockwaves through the business. She spoke about it in interviews on social media and refused to back down. To many potential employers, it created the impression that working with her might come with controversy. The tension didn't stop there. When Netflix offered her a deal for a comedy special, she rejected it, arguing that the pay was far lower than what white comedians were receiving. Believing it was a case of discrimination, she filed a lawsuit against the streaming giant. Although the case was eventually settled, the public legal battle only added to the perception that Monique was difficult to work with. Ironically, many people agreed with the issues she raised. Pay inequality and the treatment of black actresses in Hollywood are very real conversations. But the way she fought those battles changed how the industry saw her. In the end, Monique's story became a cautionary tale. She went from an Oscar-winning powerhouse to a Hollywood outsider, not because she lacked talent, but because in an industry built on relationships and strategy, she chose to fight every battle at once instead of choosing them wisely. Columbus Short once looked like he was headed for a dream career. A gifted dancer, actor, and choreographer, he worked alongside major artists and secured impressive film roles early on. His biggest breakthrough came when he landed the role of Harrison Wright on ABC's smash hit Scandal. The show dominated ratings, and Short stood among its central cast members, positioned for long-term success. But that promising path collapsed, largely because of his own choices. Trouble began when domestic violence allegations surfaced from his wife. Instead of managing the crisis quietly and responsibly, Short's behavior grew increasingly unpredictable. Arrests followed, several of them, ranging from an altercation where he struck a man at a restaurant to multiple domestic violence incidents involving different women. Behind the scenes on Scandal, the problems became impossible to ignore. Reports circulated about him arriving late to set, behaving unprofessionally, and allowing his chaotic personal life to spill into his work. By 2014, show creator Shonda Rhimes had reached her limit. Short was fired from the series, and his character was abruptly written off. Later, Short openly admitted that his own behavior had led to his dismissal. Unfortunately, the fallout didn't end there. After leaving Scandal, his legal issues continued to mount. He violated restraining orders, failed to pay child support, and faced additional arrests. Public comments criticizing former co-stars only worsened his public image. In later interviews, Short claimed he had struggled with serious substance addiction during his time on the show and said he is now sober. But by then, the damage to his reputation and his career was already done. In a remarkably short time, Columbus Short went from starring in one of television's most successful dramas, with steady income and a rapidly growing fan base, to someone major studios and networks were unwilling to hire. While he has appeared in a handful of low-budget projects, His once promising career as a working Hollywood actor has largely faded away. The tragedy is that the talent was always there. The opportunity was real. But addiction, violence, and repeated bad decisions dismantled everything he had spent years building. Aries Spears. Aries Spears. He should have been one of the biggest comedians in America. For years he was a standout cast member on MTV, famous for razor-sharp comedy and some of the most spot-on impressions in the business. The talent was undeniable, good enough to stand alongside names like Dave Chappelle or Kevin Hart. But somewhere along the way, his own choices and words kept that level of success just out of reach. Spears slowly built a reputation for being intensely critical of other comedians, especially the ones who were thriving. Honest critique is part of the craft, but Spears often went far beyond that. On podcasts and in interviews, he regularly tore into fellow comics, calling them untalented, accusing them of joke theft, or claiming they weren't real comedians at all. Public feuds followed, including clashes with Kevin Hart, Tiffany Haddish, and others. The real issue wasn't simply that he criticized people, it was that negativity became his brand. When audiences heard the name Aries Spears, they didn't think first about his comedy, they thought about him complaining about everyone else. That reputation made many people in the industry hesitant to collaborate with him or support his work. Then, in 2022, everything hit a breaking point. Spears became entangled in a lawsuit involving inappropriate content filmed years earlier with Tiffany Haddish that included a minor. Although the case was eventually dismissed, the damage to his public image was already done. In truth, his career had been losing momentum long before the lawsuit, largely because of his reputation for being combative and difficult. And that's the tragedy of it all, Aries Spears is genuinely gifted. His impressions rank among the best in comedy, and when he locks in on his craft, he's electric. But too often he chose tearing others down over building himself up. Bridges were burned, opportunities faded, and doors quietly closed. Today, instead of commanding the massive career his talent once promised, Spears spends most of his time doing podcasts and smaller shows, a reminder of how even great talent can be overshadowed by the choices that surround it. Flex Alexander. Remember that name. In the early 2000s, he was everywhere. Charismatic, quick-witted, and effortlessly likable, he became a familiar face on television thanks to his hit sitcom One-on-One, which ran for 5 successful seasons on UPN. At the time, it looked like Flex was on a straight path to a long, thriving career in Hollywood. But when the show ended, something unexpected happened. Flex Alexander quietly faded from mainstream entertainment, and much of that disappearance was the result of his own career decisions. After One-on-One wrapped, Flex was offered several opportunities to continue working in television. But he had bigger ambitions. He didn't want to stay in sitcoms, he wanted to become a movie star. In his mind, continuing in television risked trapping him in a single type of role. So instead of accepting steady work, he waited for film roles that could launch him as a leading man on the big screen. The problem was that those roles never arrived at the scale he imagined. And rather than building his film career step by step with smaller parts, Flex chose to hold out for something bigger. At the same time, he developed a reputation in Hollywood for being difficult during negotiations. Several producers later mentioned that contract discussions with him could be complicated. Flex had very clear demands about what he would and wouldn't do, how much he expected to be paid, and exactly what his role needed to include. Knowing your value is important in Hollywood, but when flexibility disappears, opportunities often disappear with it. On top of that, some of the film projects he eventually accepted didn't help his reputation. Flex appeared in a number of direct-to-video movies that failed to highlight his strengths and, in many ways, weakened his brand. Instead of carefully choosing strong, meaningful roles, he took quick paychecks from poorly produced films. Over time, those choices made studio executives less confident about casting him in larger projects. By the time Flex realized that being more flexible and more strategic might have opened more doors, the industry had already moved forward. New faces had taken the spotlight. The momentum he once had was gone. Flex Alexander went from starring in his own successful sitcom to struggling for consistent work. He's appeared in occasional small roles since then, but nothing that comes close to the success he once enjoyed during the era of one-on-one. Cat Williams. Few comedians of his generation possess the raw, effortless brilliance that Cat Williams brings to the stage. His voice, timing, and fearless delivery created a style that feels entirely his own, sharp, electric, and impossible to ignore. Over the years, he's delivered multiple hit comedy specials, memorable film performances, and even earned an Emmy nomination. On pure talent alone, Williams should be mentioned alongside the greatest comedians in the world. But instead of being defined solely by his comedy, much of his career has been overshadowed by controversy and legal trouble. Williams has been arrested more than 30 times for a range of offenses, including assault, child endangerment, battery, and gun possession. The incidents became so frequent that they almost turned into a running joke in the media. Every few months, another headline seemed to appear, another arrest, another altercation, another chaotic moment surrounding Cat Williams. And that contrast is what makes his story so frustrating. On stage, Williams is magnetic, quick, fearless, and wildly intelligent with his observations. But off stage, his personal life has often been unpredictable and turbulent, and it has taken a toll on his career. He's walked off stage mid-performance, clashed with audience members, canceled tours, and faced lawsuits from promoters and venues as a result. Eventually, his reputation for being unreliable made many venues hesitant to book him, even though audiences still showed up whenever his name was on the marquee. Williams has also been involved in very public feuds with several major comedians, including Steve Harvey, Kevin Hart, Tiffany Haddish, and others. Some of his critiques may have had merit, but the way he delivered them, blunt, aggressive, and deeply personal, often made it sound less like commentary and more like resentment toward others' success. What makes Cat Williams' story especially tragic is this: when he's focused, disciplined, and healthy, he's absolutely phenomenal. His stand-up specials prove it, a comedian operating at the very peak of his craft. But recurring legal issues and personal struggles have repeatedly pulled him away from that greatness. He had every ingredient to become one of the most respected comedians of his era. Instead, his career has unfolded like a roller coaster, moments of brilliance followed by sudden drops, many of them created by his own choices. Hollywood has never lacked talent. But talent alone rarely guarantees longevity. Reputation, humility, and smart decisions often matter just as much as raw ability. The actors we talked about today had it all: fame, wealth, and limitless opportunity. Yet a single mistake or a string of bad decisions was enough to reshape their futures forever. So what do you think? Which story surprised you the most? Leave a comment below, and if you enjoy uncovering the real stories behind Hollywood fame, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more.